Today's project is miniature cherry crostata and a little scene. MiniTube, settle down and watch MiniTube. My nephew Luke said he wanted to see if I could make a miniature cherry pie. And I found on YouTube that there were already a number of miniature cherry pie tutorials, so I wanted to make something a little different. I went to the craft store and found myself some greenery, used my 60% off coupon, and came home and found out that I could peel these leaves from the branch, and then I used the fabric from the leaves to make miniature leaves for my cherry tree. The fabric doesn't fray, so it makes it perfect for doing this for craft projects. I also found at the craft store this 49-cent on clearance little 5x6 board, and it made the perfect backdrop for my project. I rolled out some brown clay and then shaped it like a tree on the left-hand side of the board, and I put it on kind of in lumps and chunks and pieces, and now I'm just smoothing those lumps out with this ball tool. It's really okay to have a lumpy tree because really, look at nature. Trees are super lumpy, and I'm using this ball tool just to make it so that those cracks aren't so pronounced. I'm also using my fingers, and fingers are one of the greatest craft tools ever, aren't they? Now I'm using my needle tool to make little lines in the bark of the tree. And this is a neat effect, and I think you definitely could leave your tree with just these little lines. But when I went on Google to see what cherry bark looks like, I found that it's actually kind of cracked and ragged looking, and it's not really a brown tree at all, at least not every variety of cherry tree. So I used those lines that I carved as a guideline to go back with my needle tool. And right now I'm just kind of carving little shapes using those lines as a reference. And so I'm just kind of picking and jabbing and poking and scuffing up the surface to make the bark look more jagged like cherry bark looks. And of course, once this is done, I'll bake it in the oven. And I think I baked this for about a half an hour once it was done. This took a little while because the tree was the bulk of this project, but it actually, to me, was the most fun part of the project. And so I didn't mind at all. I did extend the texture all the way out to the tips of the branches. And here you can get a good shot of what the bark looks like at this stage. And again, you could leave it at this stage, but you'll see what I do later on to change the color. Now I'm making cherries for the cherry crostata. I'm just picking up little pieces of red polymer clay and poking a little hole in the top with a ball tool. After I baked them, I did give them a wash with some water and a little bit of purple and a little bit of dark red paint in acrylic, just to make them look a little more, like they had a little more variety in color. I picked up this tool probably a month ago because I knew I'd need it at some point. And I got a dowel, and I'm cutting off a shape so that I can make myself a rolling pin. I also bought a smaller dowel, or a pack of smaller dowels, to make the handles for the rolling pin, and I used the sandpaper to shape those the way that I wanted to as well. You could definitely use toothpicks for the handles, but I didn't have the right kind of toothpicks. The ones I have here at home are flat. But I'm using the sandpaper to just round off the edges of the rolling pin. If you look at a real rolling pin, you'll see that the edges are rounded and not 90-degree sharp angles. I'm picking a little hole into the end of the rolling pin and then widening that hole with my ball tool so that it can accept the handle of the rolling pin. And I just used Aleene's tacky glue to glue that in place, and I let it set for a little while, and it looks really, really cute. Okay, now it's time to make the tree the color that I want it to be. This was one of those times where I got the project, to this point, and then I was like, okay, this is either gonna be awesome or I'm gonna totally botch up everything and I'm gonna have to start over at the beginning. But you just have to kind of like be motivated and give it a try to see what happens. I used a pretty dry brush. I wiped most of the paint off and then just began lightly applying it to the bark of the tree. And look how cute that is. I'm super pleased with how it turned out. It did just what I wanted it to do, which was to make the outside of the bark look like that kind of pale tan gray color, but it's retaining that deeper inside color of that darker kind of cherry chocolate brown, just like a real cherry tree. And it was super fun to do this. I could have done that all day. And just seeing this little tree come to life was really, really neat, but I didn't want to overdo it. I just barely used any of that paint at all. Then I'm going to paint the background, and I wasn't super neat when I was putting that top coat on the tree because I knew I was going to go over it with blue to make a blue sky. I did give it a couple of coats just to have it look really just nice and vibrant. And there you go. Okay, so this was, I wanted to make a nest, and I thought, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drag this string through some paint. It's going to make it wet. I'm going to shape it around my finger, and it's going to make a nest shape, and I'm just going to sit and hold it until it dries. I don't know what I was thinking. First of all, I should have cut the string before I started, but then this was so dirty, and I guess, what did I think? I was going to sit around with paint on my fingers for a couple hours while this little nest dried? It was not thought all the way through. So I went to the kitchen and I got some aluminum foil and I crushed it into the shape of a finger, which obviously I could then wrap the string around and set aside while I continued crafting. And that was a much better idea. I also cut the string this time, but it really did work out pretty slick. The paint acted kind of like a glue, and as it dried, it held the nest shape together. I did rub a little Aleene's tacky glue on it, also just to really reinforce it. I'm making cherries now for the cherry tree, and this project is not to scale, guys. It's just a fun craft project. So I made these cherries pretty big. I wanted them to be real visible on the tree. I shaped wire into little V's, and then I used some translucent liquid Sculpey to help hold those cherries on the wire. I rolled out a thin sheet of light dough color and just barely pressed a circle on it so I knew how big my crostata would be, and then went around it maybe about 1/4 of an inch or so out with my X-Acto knife. And it's pretty rough, but crostatas are meant to be just kind of a real rustic food, and so it's okay for them to look, you know, kind of lumpy and bumpy and jagged. I mixed the cherries with some translucent liquid Sculpey to help them hold their shape, and then just used the back of a paintbrush to very gently lift that dough and, you know, kind of pinch it in and shape it around the filling, just like you would for a real crostata. And this was pretty fun to do. I like to make pastry, and this was really just like making an actual miniature pastry. I did texture the outside of it with a toothbrush also, I didn't have footage of that. And then I'm giving it a little bit of a color bath with chalk pastel. I just scraped it off with my X-Acto knife, and I'm painting it on with a paintbrush. I think I used a little bit of yellow first, and then that kind of rusty color, and now I'm putting on a darker brown around the edges where it would have sat on maybe a tray, and then I'm hitting the highlights where it would have been closer to the heat sources, just to make it look extra real. I wanted to make a little timer too, and I just cut out a really simple shape from some aqua colored clay, and I'm making a little dial, and then I did put a little white strip of clay on to make the handle for the timer. I also thought I'd make a miniature oven mitt, and I again just shaped this out of polymer clay. I'm using my blade to just make fine lines like it's a kind of a quilted fabric, and I went over that with a ball tool. Then I added some texture with a toothbrush to make it look more like fabric, and this little mitt was actually really fun to make too. I shaped very, very tiny balls of white polymer clay and put them in the center of each diamond shape so that it added a pattern to the oven mitt. And then when I was done with that, I used a ball tool to kind of mush those circles down and then retextured with the toothbrush. Here is a very up close and personal shot of my glue tube. And I'm just going to use a little bit of this tacky glue to stick the cherries onto the tree. And I'm adding glue to the top of the stems and also to the back of each cherry so that it is attached in 3 places. I didn't want them to fall off. So I'm actually just putting these cherries on the tree. Where the cherries join the tree, I'm going to hide with leaves. So you don't have to worry about that, you know, being real visible. Here are my tiny leaves that I cut, and I'm bending each one of them in half so it has a little bit more of a leaf shape to it and it's not just a flat shape. And then I'm sticking it down, and I'm going to use a ball tool to really push it into place so that the glue gets into all the cracks and holds that leaf tight. I'm adding a glaze to my cherry crostata, and I was pretty generous with the glaze because I wanted it to look really shiny and wet. And so I probably used more of it than I would if I was just painting, something to give it a shiny coat. I did put some glaze on the kitchen timer too, to the left there. Nearing the end of my project now, and so it was time to stick everything down on my board that I made. You can see my nest is in place and the crostatas on a piece of parchment paper. I found these really neat little miniature recipes in a scrapbook pad of mine. They were with some Thanksgiving recipes. And so I thought it would be neat to attach those to the board too, just like somebody had been digging through the recipes. You can see too that I made some dough to go underneath the rolling pin, and I just added some white chalk pastel to that to make it look like there was flour. And all of these I'm just sticking down with tacky glue. And you can see the egg is in the nest. I made a tiny little spatula there too. And I'm going to add a little green worm to the branch at the top. And there's my project. This was a lot of fun to do. I'm super appreciative to Luke for making the suggestion. I hope y'all liked watching my tutorial, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye guys!